Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Dan Proft, co-host of Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560 from 5 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday with Amy Jacobson. And joining me on this edition is Pat Hughes, who's the co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, illinoisopportunity.org. And Pat, we are in special session with the Illinois General Assembly.
It's not so special so far.
After Governor Rauner called the special session and then delivered a statewide address on Tuesday evening prior to the start of the special session Wednesday, in which he essentially framed what he is willing to do and what he needs the General Assembly to do so that the two can arrive at a constitutionally balanced budget that he will sign. So here's a little bit from Rauner's statewide address.
We've asked the General Assembly to come together in a special session for the next 10 days, not as Democrats and Republicans, but as leaders who share bipartisan concern for our state's future. We must agree on a balanced budget plan and get it to my desk before the end of the state's fiscal year, 1 week from Friday.
So there's the pro forma cliched rhetoric of bipartisan compromise from the governor. And then rising to the challenge was State Representative Greg Harris from Chicago with the official Democrat response. He's the Madigan designee on budget discussions. And he offered his own string of cliches.
Governor, your actions speak louder than your campaign rhetoric. After more than 700 days of blocking compromise, it's up to you to prove that you are finally ready to put the needs of Illinois families ahead of political games and start working in good faith on a budget.
So, Pat, I'll take Greg Harris, and I'll let you have the first crack at Governor Rauner. It's worth noting for Representative Harris that for every one of those 700 days he mentioned, Madigan and House Democrats have had either a supermajority or a majority where they could have passed a budget and put it on the governor's desk, the way that Senate Democrats passed a budget since they have the supermajority in the Senate, since the way they passed a budget in May. So they've chosen not to do that because, of course, Madigan doesn't want to wear the jacket alone for structural tax increases. He wants Republicans on board. That's why they haven't moved on it, even though the Senate did last month. And that's why they have not sent Governor Rauner a budget in said 700 days, because they're only interested in tax increases, not in spending restraint or spending reforms. The problem, of course, is what the governor did in framing this special session is sign on to those structural tax increases in theory.
Yeah, Dan, if you listen to the clip that you just played from the governor and you listen carefully, it sounds like, you know, those like hostages that are reading a card. He sounds like he's a hostage reading a card. And the reason he sounds like that, Dan, is because that's what he is. He's a hostage to a circumstance that he has helped create. He's a hostage to a staff that wants him to get past this budget impasse. And what he's done politically is potentially sign his death knell as a candidate in 2018, because now every single time J.B. Pritzker or Chris Kennedy says anything about Governor Rauner, well, he's the guy who chose to raise taxes on everybody, and I'm not going to do that as a candidate for governor. I might tax the wealthy, the top 1%, but I wouldn't do an across-the-board tax. There's no reason to do that. And so now he's got to wear that jacket like you mentioned, and it's not a good one. And what has happened ultimately, and hopefully he'll pivot from this, so we can get to that in a second, is you have a governor who has abandoned his campaign promises and has left his brand as a reformer in the dust. Well, that's a big problem.
That's the problem. That jacket will fit better than J.B. Pritzker's pullover sweater if the Democrats do it right. And Wall Street Journal opined on Governor Rauner's capitulation. He calls it compromise. The Journal calls it capitulation. I call it capitulation. So the Journal editorial board saying the bigger problem is that his proposed deal, Rauner's, includes almost none of the reforms Illinois desperately needs to compete with neighboring states, and repair its fiscal house. It includes nothing on right to work and workers' comp. It doesn't give local governments the collective bargaining reforms they need. It fails to solve the $130 billion or so in unfunded pension liabilities. And that's just surface skimming on behalf of the Journal. The infirmities go much deeper and wider than even they're suggesting. And what he's done, even if Pritzker or Kennedy or whoever their nominee is, says, I support this deal too. Even if they supported the deal that Rauner's proposing, and Madigan and Cullerton put it on his desk for signature, then they're all in it together. Then he's destroyed any contrast. And they're all competing for the same universe, the government-centric universe of political ruling class members and their appendages, and those that benefit from the status quo, and the kind of goo-goo elites that run associations and are insulated from terrible public policy. Think about the champagne socialists on the lakefront or the North Shore. If the two sides are going to compete for that universe and that's going to decide the gubernatorial election, then Rauner's a dead-bang loser. He'll get a percentage of those individuals, but he's going to lose the 95% of people outside of the political ruling class who are not the beneficiaries of this Ponzi scheme, who are going to be hurt to varying degrees, and who Rauner needs to have revolt against the ruling class, lead the revolt against the ruling class in order to be reelected. So even if they don't even if they sign on to this idea, he's really decimated his maverick brand, as you're suggesting. Even if they don't send him a budget, because he's doing this to, I think, in parts, I'm reasonable, I'm open to compromise, I want to get a deal done, and I want people to see how reasonable and open-minded and desirous of a deal I am. Even just suggesting that he's willing to do 180 from getting the state income tax down to 3% by the end of his first term to putting it back near 5%, where Quinn left it by the end of his first term. Even by opening the door to that idea, he has done himself great political damage.
He has, and the people that you mention that are going to bleed off of him, the people that he's leaving behind, I'm one of those people, Dan. And I was a supporter of Governor Rauner in the primary when he was just Bruce Rauner, and I've been a supporter of him both publicly and in our meetings in private with the governor the entire time, trying to help him any way I can, and he is going to lose me. And the part of the reason for that is, people like you and I, Dan, people who are fiscal conservatives, but also social conservatives who believe in certain traditional views and values of the Republican Party. We sort of swallowed all of those issues because we thought that Rauner could help be an economic savior for our state. And if he's not going to be that, and he's going to give $50,000 to Planned Parenthood, well, then all bets are off. What difference does it make at this point, right? Give me J.B. Pritzker. I don't care. Because at least I can have the integrity of knowing I did what was right on principle. And there are a lot of people in the state, Dan, you and I know them well. A couple 100,000 of them voted for us. Those same people are going to say, why do we want Bruce Rauner? And if this gets out more and more aggressively, he's going to lose his right flank. And if he loses it, he has no chance. And I don't think his staff has an appreciation for that. I think mostly because they have contempt for that right flank. But when that right flank leaves, he's, like you said, he's a dead bang loser.
Well, and they should take judicial notice of what happened to Mark Kirk, because that's exactly what happened to Mark Kirk. He was a man without a country. And that's where Rauner is heading with what he suggested he's open to, which would be income tax increase, 32%, corporate tax increase to 7%, extension of the sales tax to services like dry cleaning and landscaping, and cable TV tax.
And in exchange for a window dressing property tax reform. That's not actual property tax reform, right? It's just window dressing.
Well, it's temporary.
Right.
It's a property tax freeze with potentially a referendum component and term limits. But, I mean, he's done so much negotiating with himself over the last 2 years. Madigan could probably get him to continue that and accept less. And I'll tell you what, the belief for a long time was that Madigan didn't want a deal. But if he can have weak-kneed Republicans in the House and the Senate fold and provide political cover, including for some of his targets, then if I'm him, I call Rauner's bluff, put it on his desk, have him sign it. Rauner will be over. The chance to take back the House, to make incursions into the Senate super majority that Democrats enjoy will be over. We'll be in the minority for another decade, and most of us won't be here.
You know what's so sad?
By the end of that next decade.
You know what's so sad about this, Dan, is if you look at the electorate and you look at the people who are being protected and helped by the left, right? Public sector unions, trial lawyers, the associations you talked about. That's such a small degree of the populace. And I get that they put in a lot of money and they can drive out vote. But if Rauner was willing to stand on the side of everyone else and stoke the revolt, it's out there. It's out there in the country. Right. It's out there now. And so the squandering of the opportunity is so frustrating and hard to get my head around.
He's behaving like he's Jim Edgar and this is 1994. And he's not, and it's 2017. And Illinois is the worst governed state in the nation by a wide measure, maybe the worst governed state in the history of America, because we have the worst credit rating of any state in the history of America. We're being compared to not other states, but to U.S. territories that are bankrupt like Puerto Rico. And I'll tell you what, you got John Cass in the Tribune writing this week. What should we do with Illinois? Dissolve it.
Yeah, let it bleed into Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa.
Yeah, let our neighboring states take the parts they want, and he's of course having a little bit of fun to keep from tracing his veins, but he talks about here, carve out 40 acres for Tiny Dancer, and we can call that Ramonia. Carve out some area for Toni Preckwinkle, we can call her the queen of Taxwinkeltopia, and so forth. Dan, it's only funny if you don't live here.
This is what happens when you have a governor who is paying attention to the wrong people and who wants to appease the wrong people, the editorial boards, the civic committee, like you say, the Champagne socialists on the North Shore, right? That milieu, and that's his staff. Those are the people that they hear and listen to. You mentioned that Wall Street Journal article. Just after the Wall Street Journal article came out, Cranes went out with an article saying, hey, Wall Street Journal, stay out of our business. Why? Because Cranes is part of the same problem that is stoking all this, and that's the audience Rauner's going to, and it's an enormous mistake.